please.
Honorable Mayor Schoenheider,
Here.
Alderman Novit,
Here.
Alderman Waldeck, Alderman Moore, Alderman Pandeleon is absent, Alderman Tack,
Here.
Alderman Reisenberg,
Here.
Alderman Palmer is absent, Alderman Edelman.
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Biddy, very much. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on the agenda this evening is comments by Mayor. I just have a couple of brief ones. Number one, I'd like to remind everyone that the ward meetings are in process. We had our first one last week. The next one will be the third ward meeting on Thursday, April 3rd from 7 to 8:30 at Elwha Farm. Ward 4 meeting is Tuesday, April 8th at Dickinson Hall, 7 to 8:30. And the Ward 2 meeting is Tuesday, May 13th from 7 to 8:30 at Cherokee School. I would encourage every resident to come out, meet with your alderman, and certainly express your ideas and opinions and give feedback on what's happening in the city. I also want to mention that we've been, as a part of the kind of outreach through the ward meetings in combination with Bob and Kathy and Susan Kelsey, initiating a process to call on some of our larger local businesses in town. Very often we get very focused on recruiting new businesses. Susan does a wonderful job of that on the retail side, but we're going to have a real focus this year on making some calls on existing business, trying to get feedback from them and making sure that they understand we're grateful they're in town and trying to understand what we can do to help them stay and grow. So we're excited about that and look forward to beginning that as well. And those were my comments this evening. Next item on the agenda, comments by City Manager Bob Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. All I have is to wish everyone a happy St. Patty's Day. That completes my report for this evening.
It's very complicated. Thanks, Bob. Next item on the agenda, comments by council members.
Quickie.
Alderman
Yesterday, 4 p.m., I had the pleasure of attending the Lake Forest Civic Orchestra performing at the high school with the high school students. And I'm more of a rock and roller than a Shostakovich Symphony 5. But
Very good.
it was phenomenal. It was just phenomenal, and I'm so impressed by our civic orchestra. Plus, the French horn player is a guy I play tennis with all the time, and I had no idea he plays a French horn. So I recommend, if you ever get an opportunity, go listen to our orchestra. They're great.
Thank you. Any other comments? Hearing none, next item on the agenda, opportunity for citizens to address the City Council on non-agenda items. Anyone care to address the council this evening? Excuse me, seeing none, moving on. Item number 5, items for omnibus vote consideration. There are 10 of them this evening. I will read them all. If any member of the council would like to take one separately, we can address them. If not, I'll ask for approval through a roll call vote at the end. Item number 1, approval of the March 3, 2014 City Council minutes. Item number 2, resolution of appreciation for Lieutenant Arthur A. Ticampi. Item number 3, consideration of a resolution in support of designating the Robert McClory Bike Path as part of the U.S. Bike Route 37. Item number 4, approval to authorize winter 2014-2015 salt purchase. Item number 5, award of bid for the replacement of one unmarked police vehicle included in the FY 2015 capital equipment budget. Item number 6, approval of the contract for Phase 2 and Phase 3 engineering construction for the Lake Forest Cemetery Ravine Management Plan. Number 7, consideration of ordinances approving recommendations from the Zoning Board of Appeals, first reading, and if so desired by the council, final approval. Item number 8, consideration of an ordinance approving a recommendation from the Building Review Board, again, first reading, and if desired by the council, final approval. Item number 9, consideration of an ordinance approving a recommendation from the Historic Preservation Commission, first reading, and if desired by the council, final approval. And item 10, approval of a sales contract to purchase Wedgewood Lot number 24 property. Any member of the council wish to take any of those items separately?
Number 6, please.
Alderman Moore?
Yes, number 6, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like to go ahead?
Oh, yes, sorry.
6 is yours.
Okay, perfect. Number 6 on the cemetery, and I just, with Forest Park happening and the disruption that caused and the amount of backing up and work that we had to do on the South Beach Access Road, and before garbage collection and water and sewer get moved to Parks and Rec, I would like to suggest that there is some aesthetic oversight that gets put in place with the cemetery work. And potentially another community panel. Rami Lopat, I think, would be more than qualified for something like this, with her knowledge of ravines and plantings and things. In fact, it's my recollection that we actually talked about this before the next levels would go into place. Because when Rish was here, we discussed what a perfectly engineered ravine would look like, and while there would be no mistakes made in a perfectly engineered ravine, it could very easily be a concrete gutter 50 feet wide and poured up, and it would be considered an engineering success. And I think we have an example of that in the city that was shown to us before. It may even be in the north end of the west end of the cemetery. So I really think it's important, as it speaks to the character of Lake Forest and to the aesthetic. We don't have any aesthetic oversight for the non-built environment, and I think that we need that. I really don't want to see the town get ripped apart again by the insensitivity that we were led through the last couple of events. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but I feel strongly in that regard. So I would like to table, if it's acceptable, the proposal to get the next phase done until such aesthetic oversight is put in place on a permanent or an ad hoc basis for this particular site.
Bob, any comments?
Well, I think we'd be happy, and I know Chuck Myers is here to talk about this. The preparation of this work is going to take a few months anyways, and so I guess I would just ask that I have no problem with the council having a conversation about whether we want to go to, I'll call it an aesthetic review board. But I think, unless Chuck tells me otherwise, I'd think we'd like to get started on this work, and this work could then go before a board. It will right now, under the conditions of the Cemetery Commission, be reviewed by the Cemetery Commission that has, I think, a couple of landscape-sensitive people on there right now. But I think the idea of an aesthetic review board, I think, should have to come back to the council, because we'll have to talk about what the duties, responsibilities, how it fits in with some of the other boards and commissions that we currently have, and who's going to be appointed to it and so forth.
Before Chuck responds, could I ask a couple of questions just for informative purposes?
Mm-hmm.
First, I'm curious as to why you feel so strongly about this, number one. And I'm not so sure I got it from your comments. Number two, what process do we have in place to make sure that this is done properly now? And maybe that would come from you, Chuck. And then, David, number three, why don't you think the current process, before we would overlay another process, why don't you think the current process is working? And then, should we consider perhaps revising that process so before we put on another layer?
Who's first?
You. I'm sorry, I'm not directing this, but no,
I'm not necessarily suggesting that we create a new commission. Maybe it falls under BRB and HPC if it's historic or non-historic. Maybe there's where needed, there's an ad hoc group put together. Things like that. That would be, I don't want to create another process by which a petitioner would have to go through as far as that goes. But right now, as we learned on the South Beach Access Road, that I think turned out very well because we did put an ad hoc group together, informally albeit, but it was put together. And I think, again, I don't want to say that engineering builds ugly things. I would say that the mission of engineering is different than the mission of an aesthetic review, to answer your question. And I think it's in expectation setting, if you tell someone to build you a strong bridge, and that's all you say, then it might be ugly. And I think that's, and I think there are different skill sets, albeit I'm sure there are people that are qualified in many aspects. Some people can rub their tummy and pat their head, but I think to charge somebody who's trained in engineering to have their own internal aesthetic review is kind of contrary to the way we run the other departments and the other processes here in the city. And I think it's expecting something that in many cases may not be realistic, if that answers your question.
Could I ask a question? And this is just a general question to kind of put everything in perspective. A lot of these studies, be it the phase 1 and phase 2, we need grant funding to do these projects. Money is an important thing to get these things done. Are we trying to get in a position where we could obtain the grants to have the projects performed? Is that pretty much the motivation of going ahead at this
Yeah,
point?
absolutely.
We
Go
could
ahead.
phase in the aesthetic parts of this at a later point, but we have to get to a position where we actually have the funds to do the projects. This would be a precursor to put ourselves in position to get the necessary grants to move ahead. So I agree with David, we want to do it right and have the aesthetics taken care of. We want to please the community, but at least these two items I think are important to get in position to have the projects actually come to fruition.
Right.
I think we're kind of putting the cart in front of the horse here. Just kind of phasing this or getting it in perspective for all.
Chuck,
That helps.
you want to give a couple, and I think, just as a question during your comment, is there as Bob mentioned, are there time frame requirements that you need to meet to get the process started that would allow us, I think as Kent was saying and David mentioned as well, that would allow us to maintain an oversight on the design, but get you going on some of the hard construction design work that needs to be done early?
Yeah, the main time that we're looking at is related to a grant. We've already applied for one. We're waiting to hear within, I think by the end of April, we'll hear the results of that. But the reason we were going forward now was the Cemetery Commission had a strong desire to move forward on this. And we did want to have a shovel-ready project for a grant. So we presented it that way, that this part of it, phase 2, would be a match toward that grant. If we don't get the grant, that's fine. The Cemetery Commission looked at it as, we want to move forward, we need to get the design, the phase 2 engineering done. And I will say too that I agree with you that the approach from a engineering versus an ecological or
With the
aesthetic.
utmost respect, of course.
Of course, some of my best friends are engineers. So I don't mean to insult them. It's just a different perspective. But the city shared that, and we have engineers, of course, on the city. So from the very beginning of this process, back in 2012, when we went out with the RFQs, we had that in mind. We wanted to have that balance. We wanted to have the ecological approach and the engineering approach combined. And that's one of the reasons why Conservation Design Forum got that award, because they have that type of approach. They have engineers on staff, and they're very strong on their ecological approach. So that's what I'm associating with the aesthetic, is the ecological.
I'm just saying there's just a couple people in town that have a couple of small opinions about ravines here, and I just thought it might be,
Yep, and we,
before it blows up and we fill the room up again.
oh, understood, totally understand that. We did have it reviewed by a couple residents, people that are experts in Ravine. So I don't know if you mentioned Rami. I'm not sure that she got to review it or not. I can't speak to that. But I know that it was reviewed by professionals and people that would have an eye for ecology or the aesthetics. So that's why we felt very comfortable moving forward. And I can assure you it's not in any way a concrete or, you know, that type of an approach. It's very much an ecological approach. So I understand your concern, but I have it as well.
I'm certainly not qualified to decide whether it's aesthetically appropriate or not for Ravine. I just know that there's a huge interest in, between Lake Forest Open Lands and citizens and landscape architects and precedent setting. And I just bumped into Dan Reeves, who used to work for the city a long time ago, and he put together a book with the Botanic Gardens and Cliff Miller. And it'd be nice if at the very least that we would be made aware of what steps are being taken if there's no official review.
Okay.
David, could I make a suggestion that, again, given Chuck's comments about moving ahead, trying to meet timing on the grants, that perhaps we approve it as part of the omnibus with the caveat that we go back and take a look at the aesthetic component and get some either additional citizen input or try to determine what's already been given, so we understand we've gone the right direction. Does that make sense?
It does, as long as the approval of the plan doesn't preclude us from potential possibilities that would be suggested, which I think,
fair?
is that fair?
Okay,
Absolutely.
all right. Okay, then, given that, I'd look for a motion to approve the omnibus.
That's with the waiver of second or first reading on item 729?
Yes.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please, Biddy.
Alderman Ovid,
Aye.
Alderman Waldeck, Alderman Moore,
Aye.
Alderman Tack,
Aye.
Alderman Reisenberg,
Aye.
Alderman Edelman.
Aye.
6 yeas, 0 nay, motion carries.
Thank you very much, Biddy. Next item on the agenda, item number 6 is ordinances. I don't believe we have any ordinances coming before the council this evening. Item number 7, new business, approval of an Elwha Farm operating agreement between the City of Lake Forest and Elwha Farm Foundation, presented by Bob Kiley, City Manager, and Victor Filippini, City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This agreement may look very familiar to you, and that's because it's very similar to one that you recently approved with the Gorton Board for operating the Gorton Community Center. This is something that actually we were working on almost at the same time with the Elwha Foundation, but agreed that we would put the Elwha agreement on the back burner until we got the Gorton one in place, and then once the Gorton agreement was ratified by the City Council, then we started reworking this agreement that is before you this evening. Let me just hit a few of the highlights. The term is 33 years with 2 additional terms, which again is very similar to the arrangement with Gorton. The operation and use that are set out in the report are to be consistent with the special use permit that exists for the Elwha property. There is budget review by the City Council, like the Gorton agreement, and audit review on an annual basis, like the Gorton agreement. There was an attachment, Exhibit C, to the agreement, which is a very similar format to the Gorton agreement, where the city is basically responsible for exterior and major HVAC components and so forth, which is the same here. Probably the only real difference, significant difference between the Gorton agreement and the Elwha agreement that's here is the fact that under the Gorton agreement, the Gorton Commission went away, and there's now just one board. Here, there was a feeling by all parties, both the commission and the foundation, that they wanted to keep the commission in place, partly because it's a relatively new organization and the sort of checks and balances that are there. So the the Elwha Commission will continue in place and serve as an oversight for the City Council, so you will continue to appoint members to the Gorton Commission on a regular basis. This evening, Bob Shaw, who is the president of the Elwha Foundation, is here this evening and would like to also make a few comments with respect to their perspective on the proposed agreement that's before you this evening. So, Bob?
Thanks, Bob. Good evening, Mayor and Alderman. My comments about the agreement will be very, very brief. I would like to just talk and bring you up to date a bit on the foundation activities. As a local resident and current president, I stand here. It's my privilege to talk a bit of the history of Elwha. I've personally been involved in everything out there for the past 16 years. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it was, the whole complex out there was designed by America's preeminent gentleman's farm architect about 100 years ago. And named for the first owners, A. Watson and Elsa, I should say Elsa and A. Watson Armour, hence the Elwha. It served as an early version of today's Chicago Botanic Gardens and Morton Arboretum, as well as being a stereotypical Midwest farm. It continued to flourish under its second owners, Lelaya and Wallace Carroll, throughout most of the second half of the 20th century before succumbing to the travails of benign neglect. And we should have, we'll get to the benign neglect in a minute here. Those are the good days, and there's the benign neglect. Then, following years of planning and spirited public debate, the 200-acre property received approval to be subdivided. It was sold in September 1998 in a contemporaneous transaction to 4 separate entities: Lake Forest Open Lands, Lake County Forest Preserve, the Middle Fork Farm developer, and the city. The city's 17 acres included all farm buildings and land, including the former gardens. Subsequently, and in parallel with Open Lands clearing the land of buckthorn and other invasive species to create spectacular views and a walking trail through the oak savanna. 2, the Forest Preserve clearing their acreage, initiating prairie restoration, and establishing a walking, jogging, biking, cross-country skiing trail from Route 60 to 176 to connect their total acreage. And 3, the Middle Fork Farm developer constructing infrastructure for residential development and access to all of these properties. In parallel with all those things, a newly formed group of area residents began brainstorming a vision for the restoration and adaptive reuse of Elwha Farm, grounds and buildings. This group evolved into an early incarnation of today's foundation and commission. Today's foundation activities include a vibrant and growing garden, kitchen, and market, which is seasonally open 3 days a week. Nearly 300 volunteers make up the equivalent of several seasonally full-time workers, and in-kind donations and volunteers make up the equivalent of an additional 3 full-time seasonal workers, all supported by 4 full-time employees who plan and manage the enterprise. Literally scores of events, from weddings, special occasions, celebrations, to cooking classes, and small group, not-for-profit, and business meetings occur on nearly a daily basis throughout the summer months and a periodic basis through the winter months. All of this, in terms of the day-to-day management, is led by the person at my left who's trying to hide, our executive director, Joanne Miller. Our annual budget has grown to $500,000, and we're constantly in the black while reinvesting in programming expansion and donor cultivation. Revenue includes lease and event income, garden and holiday market sales, and over 400 donations last year. In fact, we've had close to 1,500 donations since the foundation was created over a decade ago. What you see now in terms of the agreement is the next step in the foundation's evolution, with the agreement about which Bob has just spoken. It has been concluded after 3 years of work, notwithstanding the parallels to Gorton. The devil is in the details, and we've played with the details over this period of time. But it gives us today both the freedom and responsibility to manage Eloa Farm for the benefit of our local communities. We have evolved from dilapidated, rundown buildings and grounds, which were generally unknown to the community and a candidate for demolition and landfill, into an exciting living community amenity in just 15 years. We want this public-private partnership to thrive under the leadership and continued hard work from our residents, who give us generosity with their financial capabilities as well as their time. In closing, I'd like to briefly mention the commission, Bob's just mentioned, the reactivated commission of 7 Lake Bluff and Lake Forest residents provides oversight to the city manager and council, also serves as a sounding board for the foundation. With approval of the agreement, it will become even more active, including review of the Eloa Farm Master Plan, our annual budget, periodic review of performance throughout the year, and major capital initiatives. Thank you for your time and approval of the agreement. If you have any questions, just ask me the easy ones and Bob the tough ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Any questions from the council of either Mr. Shaw or Bob or Vic? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, I'd ask for motion to approve the Eloa Farm operating agreement with the Eloa Farm Foundation.
Yeah, so moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please, Biddy.
Alderman Novak.
Aye.
Alderman Waldeck. Alderman Moore.
Aye.
Alderman Tack.
Aye.
Alderman Reisenberg.
Aye.
Alderman Edelman.
Aye.
6 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Thanks, Biddy, very much. Next item on the agenda, additional items for council discussion. Any other items this evening, Bob? Any member of the council? Seeing none, I would ask for motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.